Legends, welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm just holding on to my voice after a huge week of coaching. And today I'm very excited to be joined by a man who's usually hiding behind the camera and, working all of those beautiful little tools that he's set up. None of this would be possible without him. So we are extremely grateful. Kym Williams, thank you, first of all, for being a wonderful part of our community, but also for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, mate. What I want to do before we dive in, I think there's a range of S&C, sports science and education topics and questions we can cover off today. But I just want our listeners to get a understanding of what brought you here. You've had a wonderful career in the AIS and then, transitioning into academia. So maybe just quickly whip us back, give us a brief summary of those early days.
Yeah, look, it's been a while now. At the moment, I've been at Flinders for nearly 10 years. But prior to that, I started my journey through human movement sciences through UniSA. Kind of fell in love with it pretty quickly, the field of sports science. I also had an older brother who was doing sports science, and that kind of pulled me in as well. We always kind of played sport when we were younger, and it just felt like a natural fit. Also, I was never going to be an athlete, so I had to find a way to get into sport in a different way. So the pathway I chose was to go through education and obviously see if I could kind of test myself in that particular domain. From there, I then got into Port Adelaide Magpies and had a fantastic experience there for 2 years before an opportunity arose at the AS, which I couldn't pass up, had to grab with both hands. So I actually went across to live in Canberra without having the job secured at that time, but I was confident that I'll make something work. Stuck around for a few months, managed to kind of find an opportunity to join the S&C department as a casual. And then from there, I just spent nearly every single day in the office, sitting there, doing work, doing anything to do with the field of sports science, strength and conditioning. At that time, I was doing a master's as well. And then eventually an opportunity came to do a full-time contract. From there, I then took on a PhD after the full-time contract ended. Absolutely loved my time at the AS in regards to got to work with some fantastic coaches, people from diverse domains as well, from biomechanics, skill acquisition, performance analysis, but strength and conditioning was the domain that I sat in. And that taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about myself, but also taught me a lot about the field of sports scientists and the role of strength and conditioning, how important it is. And then went into academia. So 6 months out before completing my PhD, finishing my PhD, I got the job at Flinders, which at the time was an absolute whirlwind kind of experience where I had 6 months left on my PhD, which seems to be the most busiest time of write-up. So I was working full-time and then also trying my best in order to kind of get the PhD done at night, but eventually got it done and, being involved with the field of sport and exercise science in a teaching capacity from there on.
Love it, mate. What a journey. And, for us, when we started to branch out into this, this tech and digital world and, looking to maybe have an impact in the education space as well, there's only one man who we wanted to get involved. So we do appreciate in your very busy schedule, you still find a way to squeeze down here. But there's probably a couple of things I want to touch on there. The first thing, I guess, from your perspective, and I know I've got my ideas, and maybe when I was a student, I know we have a lot of students that are listening to our podcast. Maybe they're just starting their degree. Maybe they are deciphering which pathway they go down. Mm-hmm. Can you give me what you think is the clear differentiation between strength and conditioning and sports science? Because from my end, I think that they're two very different realms and those job roles look very different when you get into the professional side of things. However, we tend to just, use those almost in the same sort of, circumstances or interchangeably is the word I'm looking for there. Mm. So from your perspective, what do you think is the difference between those two?
Well, I think the strength and conditioning is an outcome. Like you need to understand the field of sports science to be a good S&C coach. So without understanding the human body from complex domains, you won't design effective programs. So you've got to understand a bit of biomechanics, psychology, physiology, and of course, how to train the clients effectively alongside many other kind of domains. So, the field of strength and conditioning is so complex. Like any field that works with the human body, it's complex. You're dealing with so many interrelated factors, things that one variable may go up, but another variable may go down. One variable will go up, another variable goes up because that variable went up. So it's this dynamic game of trying to kind of work at exactly what this puzzle that we're dealing with. And the puzzle is the client, okay? And every client's going to have a different puzzle piece. It's going to have different ways the puzzle pieces interact. So it's a really challenging field. So you need to understand the field of sports science to be a good strength and conditioning coach. But from there, the strength and conditioning coach start to kind of narrow. They kind of become a little bit more specialised in the delivery of programs, but you still have that background expertise, that knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I like to look at it as the field of sports science in general should be taught in a manner that is diverse. It comes at it from many different perspectives, and that's why we generally deliver topics from diverse perspectives with diverse individuals. But eventually you're going to have to narrow your focus, and that's when you go to postgraduate studies and so forth, when you become a little bit more specialised in a particular domain so that you can meet those requirements of that job. You know, when I finished my undergrad, I wasn't prepared to be a strength and conditioning coach. I had a good understanding of the human body in the field of sport, but that didn't really my knowledge and expertise in S&C didn't really kind of come to the forefront until I kind of did my master's and got to work with people who were just particularly interested in that particular domain and got taught from people who had, skin in the game. So that was a great experience to go through ECU and do my master's through them, and got a little bit more confident, and then went into obviously becoming a practitioner myself and had some fantastic opportunities to kind of work at how do I deliver the content I know? How do I become a good S&C coach? So that's where I think S&C becomes a little bit more specialised, but it doesn't mean that your training's easier. Your training's actually probably more difficult because you become a sports scientist first, and then you start to kind of filter into a narrow specialisation. So you have the benefit of both worlds. A practical knowledge from the S&C domain, which obviously you can get as a sports scientist, but you become more narrow focused in regards to the delivery of programs, either from a resistance training or conditioning standpoint. And then, of course, prior to that, you've basically developed the general knowledge in order to understand the human body, to understand why certain training-based adaptations will occur if I apply X stimulus, why certain stimuluses don't occur if X, Y, and Z haven't been followed. So that's how I see it as a difference, as stepping stones, not kind of as a different domain.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. Probably, I think it's very context based. Depending on from what I've seen when you're getting out, practically in the strength and conditioning world, can always be dependent on the resources that your club or organisation has. So what you tend to see is that those that are maybe lesser funded, whether that be at state level or even some of your lesser known sports, you tend to have fingers in a few pies. So, your sports scientist or strength and conditioning coach will have to do a bit of GPS, they'll have to do a bit of face-to-face prescription, they'll have to do a bit of analysis of vowed force tech information and everything in between. Whereas maybe as you go up the ranks and to the pointy end of the pyramid where there is a lot of resources and people become highly specialised in their realms, let's say AFL clubs at the moment, as a generalisation, I'd say your sports scientist is probably less forward-facing to the players. They tend to delve into the back end and look at how can data inform decisions that will improve our program or improve outcomes for our players. And then your strength and conditioning coach might be a bit more forward-facing in terms of prescription. But certainly I think that that differentiation really comes, right at the top end, whereas there's it's a bit more of a grey area in those early stages for sure.
Yeah, you have to be more of a generalist in those kind of sub-elite ends because, again, the financial resources and having to do multiple roles, spot on. And remember, strength and conditioning is a domain of sports science. Sports scientists also has different domains. We've got performance analysis. We've got people who do sports biomechanics. They're classified as sports scientists in my eyes. So it's kind of, we've got these different subdomains. And you're right. As you go further up, you have people with this, fantastic expertise in a particular subdomain. Doesn't mean that they don't understand the other domains, though. It's just you become a little bit more specialised the more you spend time in a particular role. And that takes time. It takes experience. When you leave university, you think you know everything, and you clearly don't. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. In the end of the day, like I've been through it myself, confident and a little bit naive. When I left, and I was like, yeah, I've got this. And then I had to work with other people to realise, yeah, I've got this, but not as much as I thought. And then you do more readings and you realise, geez, there's so many gaps here. It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you know, the more you don't know. And so I think in the end of the day, when it comes to obviously understanding the difference between the domains, again, it's just more thinking about it as different stepping stones. You have to understand the field of the body, of course. So you need to understand human anatomy. You need to understand physiology, psychology, and a whole range of other factors, which we already mentioned. But if you're talking about a particular subdomain, strength and conditioning, that it does require specialist knowledge. And if you are going to take on that role in isolation, then you're going to probably have to have the financial means to be paid for that particular role. So you can obviously focus on it where other people potentially will be taking on other roles that allow them to have certain levels of expertise. However, I'm a big advocate of generalisation though. I like being a general, not a specialist. And there's many reasons for that. And potentially it's why I'm an academic. That's why I don't call myself a strength and conditioning coach anymore. I call myself a sports scientist because I like to kind of dabble in different fields. And it's not because the name really means anything either. Like you can call yourself whatever you want, feels based on what you relatively think you're best at or what you actually perceive yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. But I like to kind of perceive it as if I am in a role of education, I've got to give diverse expertise. I've got to understand things from different perspectives. It doesn't mean I go and call myself a psychologist because I'm not. But what I can do is understand and appreciate the role that psychology plays in how we train. How do we motivate ourselves? How can I use that information to be a better S&C coach? That's where I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable in complexity. I feel comfortable in trying to find solutions to diverse issues. And I think there's something that innate in me where obviously being an S&C coach has helped me, enormously in understanding how to communicate with athletes, because you guys are front and center. You're having to communicate with athletes and get them to buy into your program, but also understand. And some of the best coaches out there have to have a wealth of experience, because you don't understand the complexities of how to communicate with diverse people unless you've had diverse expertise. So I'm definitely of the mindset that, yes, it is obviously a subdomain, but there are many different subdomains of sports scientists, and being a specialist definitely has a role to play and is incredibly important, where I think my role was more of a generalist, trying to kind of unpack the diverse field of nature.
For sure. I think you touched on a few things there. Number one is, and I know Burjo is big on this, is that people spend too much time overthinking their job titles. And I know, actually, I had a little chat with our man Blake Ashby about this when we started at Adelaide United as well. He was super excited to try to figure out what it might be. And eventually I just told him, don't worry about it. Let's just focus on doing a great job and the rest will sort itself out. So, I know people that call themselves high performance managers at state level clubs, which, there's some conjecture around, given the fact that, it's a semi-professional environment. So, yes, you can try to push as close to high performance as possible, but is it truly high performance? Probably not, if we're honest with ourselves. You could probably maybe reframe it in head of strength conditioning or whatever it might be. So I think that was a really good point. What I want to go back to, though, a little bit deeper is you talked about how you felt when you first graduated uni, and you said you felt like you knew it all. And don't worry, we've all been there as well, don't you worry. As somebody who's now been involved in academia for a period of time, what are some of the changes you've seen in maybe the students coming through? I know from my perspective, when I first entered the industry, for example, an undergraduate degree was enough to sort of separate you from the rest of the pack. And then it got to a point where a master's degree now separates you when you're going for a job role. Then it was needed your master's degree and a level 2 ASCA. Now we're pushing towards level 3 ASCA. It won't be long until everybody's got a PhD. So I just see that level of accreditation continuing to elevate and elevate. So probably sort of a two-factor question there, Kymbo, is what are some of the characteristics of the students you're seeing? Is it changing over time? And also, do you also see the increased levels of competitiveness in the industry?
Great question. I'll start with obviously the student side of it first. Look, I think sometimes the people that surprise you the most are the quietest ones. And I've become a little bit more understanding of potentially why that's the case. I think a lot of students, by the way, are quite quiet when they first come in. I was in a class introducing the class to myself as topic coordinator. I wasn't teaching it, but I was there just to kind of say, hey, this is who I am. And I spoke to them for a period of time, and I think I scared the hell out of a few of them, but my aim wasn't that. It was just to give them some, be excited about learning, be excited about what education is going to provide. And I think sometimes education gets put into ticking a box task when we need to reframe our mindset of the reason that education matters is if we're putting more tools in the toolbox. Now, you're going to be able to put more tools in the toolbox as you can go into experience. They're just different types of tools. And so similar tools, but obviously maybe slightly changed tools. So I'm of the mindset that, most students are pretty much quiet, but as they go through their university degree, they get a little bit more confident. And you may get a few students that start to kind of probably check and challenge things, which is great. That's what we want. Like, check and challenge me. Why did you say that, Kym? How does this apply? That's great. But then we get the overconfident students who think that they know it all. And that doesn't happen often, by the way. And in the end of the day, I love that confidence. You should be confident, but we can be confidently wrong. And so can I. This is the thing, is like, we don't have all the answers. As I said to you, Dunning-Kruger effect, the more you know, the more you don't know. And I've noticed so much in the most recent years that have kind of actually tempered my perception of things, because I realized, like, the more I read, the more I know, the more I speak to people, the more I'm here at peak. I'm learning all the time from different people, and it's just hard. Like, it's complex, and there's so many, context does matter, but there's so many different ways that you can apply a particular piece of information. It's just, does it apply in this situation? And have you correctly asked the right questions in order to get to the outcome? But I do see some students being a little bit too confident. And I think as you go through masters, that confidence then goes up further, because I've got masters, where the approach should be, and something that I generally have said to students who potentially are getting a bit too confident, is understand that there's plenty that you don't know. And if you know it all, you're probably in the wrong field, especially the human body. If you go, I don't understand the human body, I'm sorry, I'm calling you out on that. You may understand parts of it, but you can't put the piece of the puzzle together. There's no silver bullet. Like, it's complex. So it's trying to basically understand that we don't have all the answers. And I've been in this field for, 15 plus years. So, and that's quite small compared to some other people. But, I'm still learning, and I have a PhD in a particular area. But no, a PhD doesn't mean that you have all the answers. PhD is a specialist field of study. So in the end of the day, just be mindful that our role is to educate you and actually make sure that you have diverse perspectives on how certain things work. In our particular domain, it's how the body works and how to basically manipulate training-based interventions in order to cause an outcome, amongst many other factors. But yeah, quieter students also, my best students in regards to those who I generally take on as research students are generally the quietest ones as well, because they're willing to learn. They don't get ahead of themselves too much. They may have an opinion that they want to share, and of course that's what they need to do, is become more confident and share that opinion. But they also understand the difficulties of what they're doing, and actually they have more uncertainty, which means you're generally going to be a little bit quieter. In regards to education in general, education's probably changed quite a lot recently. There is a bit of a perception that eventually you're going to need to have a PhD. I kind of smirk and kind of smile at that in a way, because I kind of like that, because the PhD didn't basically, it made me better researcher, but it made me more critical. And I think that's good for everyone. I obviously had a specialist field of knowledge, but by no means do I feel like that makes me more knowledgeable than someone else who's currently practicing every single day. Let's be honest, people who've got extensive 10 years experience, that should be equivalent to a PhD. So, or even less than that. I don't know what that number is. So I just feel like what it did give me is they give me the tool sets to actually take a step back, ask better questions, realize that when you read a particular article, the next article you read could say the opposite. Which one do you take? Read a third. Oh, now the third has a diverse perspective. Read a fourth. Okay, now there's some agreement. Read a fifth. Oh, now that agreement's gone again. Like, it's the byproduct of the world that we're living in. And so that uncertainty, I think, actually makes me a better practitioner, even though I'm classified not a practitioner at the moment. From an academic perspective, as a teaching perspective, that's what I'm trying to teach students is we are always trying to work at exactly how to improve the body. What we teach you today may be different in 5 years' time. But no, if you ask enough questions, you should be able to get to the right answer, and you need to make sure that you have evidence to support what you're doing. If you don't have evidence, then it's just an opinion, and our opinions can be wrong, can be grossly wrong, and potentially can lead to more consequences. So take your time, make sure you plan, and do your job well. And for you to do your job well, you need to obviously make sure you have enough information.
I think the example you used there with literature is pretty much exactly any literature and ice baths. I don't think I've ever read two single articles that are exactly the same as each other, whether that be whether they do work, they don't work, what duration of time. So I completely agree.
It's a great example, though, because recovery is such a fascinating area where when I teach recovery, actually, it's really pertinent, because I'm actually having to review recovery lectures that I'm currently doing to kind of update them, and it's spot on. Like, what temperature is safe? How long you should spend in there? Which one's better? Like, everyone has different perspectives, and so I kind of love that, though. Yes. Like, I love that differences in perspectives, because the perspectives that's being provided may be from a recovery specialist, and maybe they're actually, because they've been in recovery for so long, they're using tradition to back what they're saying, where someone from a different domain is coming in and bringing in a piece of information. There's a crumb of information that is actually really important to helping advance our knowledge. And so they have a different take on it. Who is right or who's wrong? Well, I think society will generally go with the person who has the most experience. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a reason why that's the case. But that person, the other person who's outside the domain but is trying to bring a different perspective in it, and for some reason has found themselves into recovery, look at it seriously. Like, why are they thinking it like that? Maybe they're looking from a different lens, a different perspective. And maybe that little piece of information actually has a big impact on the field. We just need to understand their perspective more. So I think differences in opinion is fine, as long as that difference of opinion, again, is supported with evidence.
Absolutely. Now, I know, obviously, with you being so involved in the education space, students obviously undertaking, their education, which we said is definitely a important piece of the puzzle. Mm. I always suggest to people that outside of that, you get your hands dirty and you coach, whether it's mum and dad or grandma out in the backyard. If you can teach grandma how to hinge, you can teach an elite athlete how to hinge. So those skills being super important to learn early. Is there anything outside of education and practical application that somebody could be doing to get themselves ahead or further themselves from your perspective?
I'm going to actually use one of the staff members here, Will. He's been here for, it's day one, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's still studying. And Will's got this benefit to everyone else. He's got 6 years plus of, practical knowledge before he even has less his degree or complete his degree. And I love that. I must admit, I didn't do that because, again, I thought eventually it would just come to me. And again, when I say, by the way, naivety that I can sometimes see in students or overconfidence, I was there as well. I can tell you right away, I was overconfident. And it took me, nearly 26, 27 when I kind of actually had to bring myself back and go, hang on a second, like, I don't know it all. And again, there's many things I've learned along the way, wisdom from experience. But I do think that we need to be making sure that students from literally, when you enter your degree, you should be seeking experience. Now, your skill sets are going to be are not going to be obviously well-defined there, but you're basically getting the benefit of both worlds. Upskilling practically, which is just as important, mixed in with the fact that then you're going through education and you can then apply what you've learned. Okay, I got taught this. Well, why would that apply to my practical practice today? That's the best way of learning, by the way. Stories. Understanding how am I going to apply this piece of content in order to get this outcome. And that's another thing that I kind of want to touch on. Like when we talk about specific concepts, like the sliding filament theory is complex. It's talking about how a muscle performs a contraction to generate force. Basically, how do we interact with the world? But when I teach it, if I just taught the sequence and just said, this does this does this, I'm going to assess you on it, most students will struggle to recite it. Most people will struggle to obviously understand, what part goes into where. Where if we teach them why it's important, they're more likely to remember, because what they're going to be able to do is then go, oh, I remember when Kym taught me this, and he taught me this is why it matters, and he told me why this particular molecule matters. Then they're more likely to be able to kind of put it into a way that it's easy to remember, easy to pull from, easy to extract from. So I'll give you an example, like the sliding filament theory. When you work out that calcium plays a key role in generating the muscle's contractile cycle, I won't go through the whole sequence, of course, but you work out that an absence of calcium means you can't contract. Now you think about, well, where could that apply? Imagine if I was working with a marathon runner and they're struggling to get to the finish line, you start to see their legs shaking. There's many reasons why that's occurring, and it's not just calcium, of course. Again, it's complex, but a lack of calcium, an absence of calcium means that you can't contract your muscles. So the nerves are firing, but the muscles aren't being able to release anything. They're not being able to release the calcium to start that contractile cycle. So now you understand, okay, well, why does that information matter? Well, if they do not have a sufficient calcium intake, let's say that they've got an intolerance, well, they need to work with a dietitian to work out where they're going to get those substitutes from. So now you understand the importance of dietitians. Of course, many reasons why you go to a dietitian, but you then can start to drill down and start to link things together going, well, this is the process, but this is why it matters. And then if you actually tell them that at the start, they're more likely to buy into what you're trying to teach them, but also you're more likely to remember it because now you've got the story to tell and you're now going, calcium's important, calcium sliding filament theory, let's connect the dots. So I think when I first started teaching, I didn't understand that. Now I do understand that. And that goes into the practical practice. Practice from day one. Work with people, ask questions. Teach your brother how to squat using the information that you've taught, making sure that you have a deep understanding for it, because if you don't understand something, you're not going to be able to teach it. But if you can teach it, and that teaching is aligned to what the field of practice is saying, then you know it. And therefore, it builds that confidence, and you're more likely to remember it down the track.
Love it. Now, this is going to sound like a little left-hand turn, Kymbo, but I think my generation was almost the guinea pigs for social media. I think MySpace and Bebo were the only social medias available when I was younger. There'll be some people listening today that are thinking, what the hell is MySpace or Bebo? But you used to have to think about like what your background was and
background song.
Yeah, what your song was, and usually it was like targeted towards something or how you're feeling. Anyway, there wasn't really any information around S&C fitness, but nowadays you log on to Instagram or Facebook and you are absolutely pummeled with information from all these fitness gurus or influencers who are saying this is the best exercise to make you perform for soccer or so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Do you see some students maybe questioning or bringing some of that information into the classroom now? Say, I saw this on social media. And how do you navigate that, or how do you help them critically evaluate what they see online?
100% it's a problem. But like when I say problem, the vast majority of content out there is fine. I really don't want it to come off as like, I'm an academic, no, this is what's right and what's wrong. No, that's not how it works. Like actually, I've watched some fantastic things on social media that are great piece of content, great practical takes, great theoretical takes, whatever it is. Someone's just putting the information out there. And I love that. Part of the reasons that we initially kind of talked about trying to find better ways of getting education out there is for this reason, because getting good people to talk about topics that are going to have big impacts, so we can get rid of some myths. You can get rid of some practices that are kind of promoted, that potentially are promoted to bump up the salary of these people to promote or sponsor a sponsorship product or promote a particular style of training that probably just needs context. And let's be honest, sometimes the best content, when I mean the best content, the content that gets the most views, are the ones that are trying to oversensitize something or trying to say something that's out of this world and is so unique and different, when it's like, that's dangerous, or you haven't got any context about when that wouldn't apply. And I understand why it's difficult. A 1 minute clip is difficult to get context through. But I have had students coming to me and going, I've seen this person, they've said this, you're wrong. And also, it doesn't help being from the field of S&C. You know, I'm not a big guy. And so when you have someone who's quite fit, you know, yourself over there, you generally are going to have a little bit more weight behind it, because it's the perception. People want someone who perceives a particular outcome. So if you're going to go to someone like myself to go and get stronger, you're going to go to Sean. Now, that doesn't bother me, because, again, my expertise is in a different domain. Again, I have said to you, I kind of have my different expertise and different skill sets that I see myself as more of a generalist trying to solve problems in a sporting context, better kind of as a management position. But there is that perception that, okay, well, you don't look that way, so you can't have an opinion. And that's just not true. And so that does work against myself, doesn't work against everyone, of course. But then I go and look into it and then I'm going, well, how do I educate them on this? What do I do here? Because the last thing I want to do, by the way, is put that person down. They're just trying. They think that they may actually think that that's the right approach. And they're just putting themselves out there. You know, it's a bit of guts for that. Are they trying to do it deliberately? No, I don't think the vast majority of people are malice people. I don't think people are deliberately trying to do it. Unfortunately, though, we are biased and we are heavily influenced by financial incentives. So we may say something that we may not initially agree with, but we know that that's what the sponsors want to say, or we want to say something that gets attention, but we've actually blinded ourselves a little bit to say something that potentially doesn't have any evidence, or you haven't actually kind of really thought about the effect too much. All you thought about is how many views I get. So I don't know. Like it's a tough one where I've just had to go about an insensitive way of going, all right, tell me why it's right. I love that kind of approach. Tell me why they're right. Now, they might be right, but I need to understand why they think they're right. And more often than not, they can't do it because they're just going off what they heard, but they don't understand what they heard, which is my point. If you don't understand it, then why would you apply it? You need to understand it, because if a coach comes to you and goes, hey, you know, Jimmy, why did you do that particular training session? You're like, saw it on social media. Like, it's not going to go down well. You're going to find yourself out of a job quickly. They need to make sure that they have trust in you and the confidence that you know what you're doing and you can defend it. Everything we should do, we should be defended. In regards to someone should come up to me and I should have no issues. Yeah, the reason I'm doing this exercise, and this exercise is for this reason. Now, the only reason I can have that confidence to do that is because I've gone through the steps to first and foremost make sure that I'm actually thinking about the finer details of the program, and I've got enough information I need to be fairly confident this is the right approach, mixed in with the fact that I'm meeting the coach's goals and I'm thinking about all the other perspectives. So I'm making sure that I take the blinkers off and making sure that the delivery that I'm providing targets many different domains of keeping everyone happy. Like, if the coach is going to increase their training load on the pitch and they've already told me, and I'm going, no, I'm not going to change my load. Well, the consequence is the athlete there, where they may be overloaded. So you're having to modify there. And then the final thing is getting other coaches to check your programs. It's probably the biggest takeaway I say for young coaches. Don't be afraid of sharing your programs. My biggest learning experience at the AS is when I actually got other coaches look at my program and they picked it apart, and rightfully so. And that actually brought me down to earth really quickly, because I was like, I did that because I thought it was the right thing to do, but also I realized I didn't have a real strong justification for it. And that kind of really reinforced to me the importance of getting different perspectives, because you may see something and go, that's the best way of doing it. This is the perfect program. But three other people will look at it and go, why did you do this? And they're not going to say it's wrong potentially, but they just want to know why. And you have to be open enough and confident enough to defend your programs, but also be open enough to realize that you may have made not a mistake, but there may be a different perspective you may have not considered. That means that you've now actually made the program better because you have a different person providing feedback that you may have not considered at that time, or you didn't know about that approach. So tell me that approach. Show me what you did. What exercise you're referring to? I've never heard about that exercise. And therefore, again, you're building more tools in your toolbox.
Love it, Kymbo. Last one before we let you back to that beautiful family, mate. Where do you see the future of education heading? For me, I'm starting to see a bit of a shift in the way that we absorb information, and maybe some of those more traditional models, both at secondary, primary, and even tertiary, establishments might be starting to shift a little bit as well. Where do you see it, given the fact that you get to see on a daily basis, the way that people absorb it?
Great question. It's we're always chasing our tail. The world's changing so quickly. Obviously, everyone knows the changes happening with AI and the complications that's causing for assessments. Again, I'm a fan of AI because I do believe it can actually be used effectively. It's the only problem that we have is, are we assessing someone's ability to use a prompt more than obviously their own knowledge and expertise? So we're trying to find ways of getting around that. We're trying to also find ways to keep students engaged. Of course, social media does have an effect on their attention spans, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's the generation of what they're having to deal with. There's nothing wrong with this generation, just so it's clear. They're just adapting to the societal changes that we've enforced. We're the ones generally making the decisions as well. They're having to obviously adapt to the decisions that we've made or things that we've created. So we're trying to find out ways to make sure we engage. Like these, they're very intelligent. That's the thing I've known is like a first year student can teach me something new. I've spoken to first year students and that thing could be like the sport they play. I do marathon. Well, okay, what did you do on the weekend? Okay, why'd you do that? I didn't know that. Or, I didn't know about that piece of equipment. It's really cool. So I've noticed that they're incredibly intelligent. The ones I get, I'm fortunate enough to obviously spend some time with. But what I have also realised is some of our practices are a little bit outdated. And that's because it's very difficult to change a lecture, change a topic. That takes hundreds of hours. And someone may say, no, that's not the case. No, it does. Like to create a lecture, a single lecture, I worked it out, it's around about 15 to 20 hours. That's researching, it's putting it together. It's a whole lot of kind of checking as well. It's in the design of it. And that takes time. So we're slow to adapt. And we're also mindful that the traditional approaches still work, but also we have to be mindful that traditional approaches can also start to not work because, again, the generation that we're dealing with have different expectations. I don't want to go down the line of fast food education, but we do have to be mindful that we do have to kind of find more effective ways, efficient ways of educating. And on top of that, let's be transparent that this generation has more challenges potentially. Now, people can question that, but they're having to work more, kind of financial stress. So we've got to take that in consideration. They may be doing 3 or 4 more hours than I had to do, or even more than that, where to afford basic living, to rent. So what I'm basically trying to get to is I love the field of digital education. The traditional space always kind of tries to preference, face-to-face education, and it does matter. Face-to-face education in most contexts can be better, is better. But I do think that a lot of people push the digital side and say it's not as good. No, you just need to change your approaches to make it better. And that's not for me to say. I'm still learning in the digital field, but you can teach well in a digital space. Just change your perspective on it and try different things and actually do some research on exactly what options, what software's out there to make maybe a practical task online. Do you need to touch something for you to understand it? No. Does it help touching it? Yes. Like if I touch a gate, get a student to touch a gate, they can feel it. They can understand the difficulties of setting up a speed gate. So if you don't give them that experience, when they touch a speed gate, they may not be familiar about how difficult it is to calibrate with the older models. So that's a good thing, but is it going to define their success in the future? Probably not, because the field of technology moves so quickly that I teach them that method. And in 3 years' time, there's new gates that you don't have to do that. So what I'm trying to get to is we need to find better ways of connecting people. We need more education to be widely available across the public. And the only way to do that is not having it secluded to an isolated location. You need to open it to the masses. And I would challenge universities. Again, the university I work at does a fantastic job in obviously providing diverse pathways. But I would love to challenge Flinders and every other university, UniSA and any university out there to think, what could we do a little bit more in an online space? They're doing things, but I reckon we could take it to another level and also find better ways of educating people who've been in the practical space for a long period of time, providing more free resources, more free courses. And if you want to go to the next step, then there are alternative avenues that you can seek in order to upskill yourself as a degree, as a postdoc, or even in a certificate or diploma. What I have learned across my time in both domains is education matters. Experience matters. It's not an or, it's an and. And the more education that we get out there, the more diverse approaches, the more that we get out of our comfort zone and find better ways of presenting in an online format, the better we are going to be as a society, because more people are informed and they have access to good quality information, and therefore they're less reliant on social media in order to guide their practices or their own perception on reality.
That is a beautiful way to wrap it up, Kymbo. Mate, it is always insightful when we get the opportunity to chat. I'm always very excited when I head down to the facility and you're there, and I try to wipe out the rest of the Arvo because I could listen to you for hours. But thank you again for your time. Thank you for your contribution to our community and our facility. Thank you for making this space, and this service a possibility for the peak community. So we appreciate you, and guys, keep your eyes peeled for some very exciting collaborations ahead. So there you have it, a chat with our very own Kym Williams. Number one for me, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I love that little visual of the more you know, actually, the less you realise that you know. Go check that out if you have not seen that before, but really, really poignant. The other one for me is that education is evolving, and that the way that we consume information is changing week in and week out. It's going to be those organisations that change and adapt to the way that we absorb information that will really have the biggest impact in the future on the next generation of practitioners.